Alright, so as I said before, I was able to get caught up on a lot of the animated movies from earlier this year and recently. So I was just going to throw them on here with Thor, so that's what's going to happen. Let's go right into our first one, which is Thor Ragnarok, the third Thor movie, and the, I don't know how many now in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's a lot at this point. Which is fine. There's because I've been a fan of these since they started. There hasn't really been one I have actively disliked that I can think of. Obviously, just the normal ones people point fingers at, like Thor 2 or Iron Man 2 or whatever. But still, I'm perfectly on board with this whole thing. So it's always fun to watch it continue, regardless of how many we keep going. I'm actually really amped for Black Panther, so hopefully it just keeps getting better from here. Obviously, to me personally, I think we're kind of still in this territory where I know that this seems to be getting a really good reaction, but to me it seems like it's still stuck in that kind of territory that everybody's been saying of if there's one, not necessarily a weak point, but a weaker point than the rest of the universe, it's the Thor movies. Uh, and this one was obviously going to try to go in a bit of a different direction than the other two because we have the director of Hunt for the Wilder People doing it, which obviously made my top 10 last year because I just really loved it. It's one of the most hilarious comedies we've had in at least the past few years. So it was clear that this was going to take a more comedic approach and not even remotely try to hide it. Because obviously the Marvel movies have been known to be a lot more comedic than the other superhero movies outside of this universe. But lately they've been really embracing that and making it like a huge part of its identity and not just an action movie that happens to have these comedic lines in it. The usual blockbuster formula in regards to that. I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it in this movie. I will say one thing that I think where it does work, that there's so much comedy in it, is that I would just talked about earlier this year with Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and how some people like to criticize that there's too much comedy in them, but at the rate they're going with the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, it almost feels like those movies are just as much comedy as they are like sci-fi and action and all that. So it's just a part of them. It's not necessarily something that's being forced in. It was just something that was always a part of them from the beginning. And this movie does feel like, not just in that sense, but also just the appearance of it in general. And it's, for a while now, we've known that Guardians of the Galaxy is obviously part of this universe. But when you look at the Avengers movies and the Guardians of the Galaxy, Guardians feel there's been a distance. Like, there's not a whole lot tying them together just yet pre-Infinity War. So it's always kind of felt like this distant thing, even though we know it's in the same universe with only like a small connection here and there. Obviously, the Infinity Stone plot is bringing all this together, but I mean, just in regards to the whole feel of it, Guardians has felt very much like it's far away from this and is only going to come in for Infinity War. But this kind of feels like a bridge point to where, while there's not like necessarily a full-on direct connection, it's really starting to feel like this is all in the same universe. So, with Guardians in the mix as well, obviously the others have been doing that just fine. But here we're really starting to get that vibe to where it's all meshing together and we're really coming together as we go forward into Infinity War. So while that does have that going for it, I'm not quite sure the comedy works as well. Because like I said, it feels much more natural in regards to those movies. Here, I say maybe it feels somewhat forced. Like the opening scene, even, when Thor is in the cage and comes down on the chain and he's spinning around, and he actually waits to talk to the dude until he comes back around and can face him. And it's like, it's kind of a funny joke. It's the fact that when it happens again, you kind of realize, so this is going to be one of those movies that has funny jokes, but then they kind of have to... They happen a little too... They don't know when to stop, is the problem. And it's like that scene, that whole joke in itself would have been funny if he had done it once. But they had to do it twice. I know that doesn't sound like too much overkill to go just from once to twice, but it really can be if it's not done as well. And yeah, from then on, the movie might as well be just as much of a comedy. But like I said, it's clear that's the direction they wanted to go, given the director they hired. But even if that's the direction they wanted to go, that doesn't necessarily mean it's immediately, that just automatically is going to make it fully work. Because there's some stuff that's just kind of way out there. Like, I mean, I guess I appreciate the joke, but I will say the cameos at the beginning, during the play, I like how far they reached, but it's kind of like, it's so noticeable, it's like, it's actually distracting. It's like if it had been somebody that wasn't that big, then it would just kind of be like a little funny thing there, but the fact that the face is so recognizable and so big, it's like you completely forgot you were watching a Thor movie for a second, and it just gets really distracting. The other cameo in there does work, especially with the director, obviously, in his previous outing. But yeah, that's not. It doesn't take away too much, but it really just, yeah, it was very surprising. If that was the initial thing, then fine. But I mean, it felt a little, yeah, maybe a little too much. So, going on, also, I'll talk about some good stuff a little bit before I go back into this. For starters, we've added new characters on top of the characters that still work just fine. Obviously, Hemsworth still makes Thor as charming as ever, with or without his hair. Ruffalo is here doing, his Hulk stuff is good, and then once he's Banner, it's like he's basically doing like a Peter McNichol kind of performance, which still works in his favor. And there's the really good scene, the really good moment, really, when it might seem a bit on the nose, but I thought it worked, when it's Banner watching the footage of Hulk, and we see Banner's reflection overtaken by the Hulk on the screen. I thought that was kind of like I said, on the nose, but still a nice visual nonetheless. Hopkins gets a couple of good scenes, as he's always had in these. Makes the most of the little screen time they give him in any of them. And then obviously Idris Elba comes in a little late, but he's getting progressively more important in these movies as we go. I remember, whenever I think back to him in the first movie, it's like, wow, he's really barely in it. But he gets progressively more to do as it goes, and handles that well enough. Then there is some new characters, like our villain being Cate Blanchett, who is, almost as usual, perfectly cast and perfectly villainous and menacing, and occasionally has a bit of a sense of humor about herself going into it as well, which does work. That sounds like there was the complaint about Ultron being too jokey. She's able to do it in kind of that little kind of sly villainy way, to where it doesn't feel like it's breaking character or anything when she does. And then there is the addition of Jeff Goldblum as well, one of the more exciting additions to this cast list, who was also teased to us in the credits of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, where you're basically playing Where's Waldo with him. And he has a really fun character. It's pretty clear that he's doing his Goldblum thing, but to see him in like the costumes and the whole get-up and just the way this character's supposed to be, he just felt perfectly cast. So it's one of those cases to where Jeff Goldblum is one of those actors to where there's always the criticism of an actor playing themselves, but the thing is Jeff Goldblum playing himself 9 times out of 10 is what we want to see from him. So he always brings on that desired effect whenever he's here, and it definitely works in his favor here as well. He's kind of doing like he's kind of like a Joaquin Phoenix and Gladiator type, only much more. Yeah, much more. I don't know if I don't know if you could say he's more over the top, but he's certainly more kind of flamboyant about it, and that definitely adds character to it. and then they add also some different creatures, like the rock creature that the director himself actually plays, and which is one of those kind of director figures into the movie things I don't mind, because he also had a really funny part in Hunt for the Wilder People when he was like the funeral director. It's one of the funniest scenes in the movie. And yeah, he's another one of those characters where when the comedy can kind of feel like it's starting to wear thin and there's too much, that character is consistently funny whenever we see him, so he had that going for him. And some other returning character I obviously neglected to mention on purpose, because who could forget, is Loki. And I do like the fact that if there's one thing in these Thor movies that never dries out, it's the relationship between Thor and Loki. That's something that's always been really strong, and this movie is no exception. And the way that Thor always kind of has to have that internal battle of, does he trust Loki or does he not? And Thor, being the good guy that he is, always wants to do that, and usually he ends up regretting it. And I love the way, not only Hiddleston, the way he plays Loki, even if it's a bit more silly than usual here, much like the movie in its entirety. He still more or less stays true to the character, and there really are those moments where he actually, like, usually if you see it enough, you kind of think, well, this is predictable, because we know even when Loki's pretending to be good, he'll eventually go bad again. But Hiddleston actually plays him convincingly enough to where it still kind of feels like you're never quite sure if he's good now or if it's just another setup. So I thought that's always been one of the stronger aspects of the movies, and I like that they really kept that up a lot here as well. If, like I said, the characters are sometimes done in by just how kind of silly the movie overall is, and not necessarily I mean, obviously they're going for something like that a little bit, but I think they kind of went a little more over that line than they were intending to, and they kind of got a bit carried away with it. Not to mention, as it goes on, in the entire first half hour to 40 minutes or so, everything feels very rushed and sudden, and it's like, I get this is the point of like the whole Doctor Strange scene, but it's like the entire first half hour or so, we're not in one location for more than 30 seconds. And that gets pretty tiring pretty fast and really messes up the pace of the movie too. And it makes the movie really feel like it's in a hurry to get, we're not really sure where. I guess we know, mainly, like most people would know from advertising and all that we're basically getting to the point where he's in this arena with Hulk. And it's like the movie's in a really big hurry to get there, but has a lot to go through to get there. So we just kind of go from scene to scene to scene without hardly being able to get a grasp on one before we're already in the other. And it just feels way too rushed, and for a movie that's 2 hours and 10 minutes in total, when you feel like you've packed so much into the first half hour, and like you're really in a hurry to get someplace, that's not very good for pacing. So, yeah, but there is certainly some stuff in there. But then there's stuff to where like there's still some stuff where the silly comedy kind of works, like the idea of Loki having post-traumatic stress after getting ragdolled by Hulk in the first Avengers. And when he sees Hulk again, it's like it all comes back to him, and he gets to celebrate when he sees it happen to somebody else. To where it's like, that's making the Loki character. I like the idea that he panics when he sees Hulk now. But they did play it up. They cut back to him maybe one too many times to really push that joke in, which is when the comedy when it's kind of beating you with it, it kind of loses its effect pretty fast, even if it was funny to begin with. But then there's stuff like I know this is sacrilege because I know the internet loves the guy, but the worst character in this movie is fucking Carl Urban, as he has like 3 different jobs in this movie. He just keeps changing position every time he meets a new person that's more powerful than him. And he is just basically a whole barrage of unfunny gags every time we see him, no matter what job he's doing. The very first scene he has is like, we're right in the middle of the opening, It's this really big action scene, and it's real big. They're doing the immigrant song thing. And it's like, this is going to go into the title. Like, this is how big this opening is, and how we're getting right into that and flowing into that, and it's getting bigger and bigger as it goes. And then we keep cutting back to Carl Urban doing unfunny shit with... It's like he's doing James Franco in Spring Breakers, the look at my shit thing, and he's showing off the stuff that he has. And it just doesn't... And I noticed that also, there was quite a few people in the theater, and there was a lot of... People were into it, but when Carl Urban's character was around, particularly in this opening scene, there was a lot of silence. And it was uncomfortable, and I could totally... There's a reason that, that there wasn't a whole lot of reaction to that, is it's just... Yeah, that character wore out its welcome in his first scene, and he kept coming back, and it was... Yeah. So that was kind of unsuccessful, but yeah, going on it though, obviously one of the big praises the movie has been having is its visual appeal, and yes, that is definitely on point. It's very... There's so... Like, another thing that people praise Guardians of the Galaxy for is how damn colorful it is, compared to other movies that are a bit more drab about their appearance. And this one really plays into that too. The poster is awesome, and really shows that off. And then it actually... It's sort of like the reverse Suicide Squad, where you saw the Suicide Squad poster, and you saw all the colors and all that, and then you're like, oh, this will actually have some flash to it, and actually have this visual appeal to it, and you watch the movie, and it's like all dark and shit. But this actually really lives up to that image you have in your head of just colors bursting into your face. There's even a moment when Thor is dropped off at a dump site, and the trash at the dump is like a vast array of colors. And it's like they made trash really stand out and pop off the screen. It's like, that takes talent. That's impressive. And they also, we've got some pretty decent visuals in here. Like I said, the new creatures look really good. There's a number of creatures in this movie that are so massive that, the Hulk looks small when he's fighting them. If that gives you any vibe. There's a lot of scenes in this movie where Hulk surprisingly looks smaller than he feels like in the other movies. But I imagine that's just the comparison of the much more vast world that he's in now. And how the visual effects artists were really able to bring that to life. So, yeah, a whole lot of back and forth here. There's some stuff that's... well, also going on, visual effects as well as action. One thing that this series has really showed is it's usually really awesome when Hulk fights somebody. Like, even if it's brief, like whether it be the ragdolling Loki, or when he turned and he turned into Hulk and then punched the thing in the fucking face in the first Avengers, and then in the second one when he fights Tony in the giant suit. These are like the highlight points of these movies, are the big Hulk moments. And this one is no different. The scene with Thor and Hulk fighting is amazing. And the thing about that is, you might think, well, that also might be kind of boring because it's basically two invincible beings just beating the shit out of each other. It's like, what's this going to lead to? But they still make it work, even though we know that neither one can really harm the other that much. So, they keep going with that vibe as well. They don't disappoint with the Hulk stuff. But then, but yeah, really it's just the fact that the comedy is non-stop, and it's not, like I said, with how I feel about Guardians and the way it ties in, it's kind of like, it's not that it's constantly comedic that I mind, it's if that stuff is funny or not, and sometimes it's just not. Then there's stuff that's just kind of weird and random, like I said, the cameo at the beginning, or for instance, the home that he supposedly put in that's been demolished is Shady Acres Care Home or something, and it's like, did they just reference Ace Ventura? Because that's random as hell, and I don't that's it just stuff like that, if you notice, it just kind of really sticks out in a way that maybe it shouldn't. Like those, if you're gonna throw in like a little, Easter egg joke or whatever, it probably should actually, the whole idea of the term Easter egg is that it's hidden. So it's like, and when it's like right up there like that, it just becomes kind of weird and distracting. So it really did kind of go back and forth. But the main problem here is that while there is a lot of humor, and a lot of it is funny, even though there's a lot that isn't also, when it is funny, it's not clever funny. Like a lot of it, and like a lot of the comedy in this movie is like slapstick, or people making comments, or people reacting. And so there's nothing, it doesn't feel like there's anything particularly smart in how it's written dialogue-wise, or how the comedy is constructed. It's pretty much just the kind of... yeah, it's basically the little comedic moments you typically see in movies like this. Just bigger and more prominent, but with hardly... yeah. So... So yeah, just the way I feel about it just kind of keeps going back and forth. But overall, it's fine. It's entertaining. The characters are strong, and it has... it reaches, despite all this, it reaches a really strong finish, which is really important. So that was certainly something they needed to do to kind of pick up where there was some slack and end on a high, and they certainly did do that. Yeah, and there's also obviously there's two post-credit scenes worth seeing. That second one, like there's always the cliffhanger, and then the joke one, and the joke one in this one is, yeah, we did need a little more of that, and I'm glad we got one more taste of it before we left. So okay, so yeah, that's yeah, there's a lot of good, a lot of not so good, but nothing particularly bad. So much like the Marvel movies, it's very rare that I don't think they've reached any kind of terrible territory yet, and I don't foresee that in their future. So yeah, it's fine, but I don't like love it the way I'm sure many people will. So yeah. Okay, we're gonna go into animated territory now, and we're gonna go ahead and start with the Emoji Movie. Just so it, yeah, just so it's like a band-aid. Okay, so the thing about the Emoji Movie was people hated the idea to begin with. It was a stupid idea, and there was really, it just kind of did it had the whole corporate vibe to it. And it's like, this is not supposed to entertain anybody. It's not going to be funny. It's not going to be clever. Even the animation will probably be subpar and lazy. And it's like, it came out, there was like one critic that called it pure evil. People were saying it's one of the worst movies ever made. People were saying, how could this happen? So many people had to get together to get this thing made. How did it not get called off at some point? Was there no one rational thinker that kind of started a chain reaction here, or did not everybody see that there was a problem here? And so I'm kind of sitting back from a distance and watching all this play out, and it's kind of like, why do I get the feeling this is one of those things that's being blown out of proportion? Because it's like, yeah, it's a stupid idea. There's pretty much nothing that they can do with it to expand on it. But it's like I defended that Angry Birds movie because I thought it was mildly funny. So it's like, what is it that really can be so bad about this that makes it even worse and more damaging than just any other bad animated movie? Except for the fact that it's, promotes the fact that laziness will still make money. And then I started watching it for a while, and yes. So, to start off with, our lead character, I guess this should have been my clue. Obviously, our lead character, Gene, is voiced by T.J. Miller, who might be one of the most unfunny people on the planet. Certainly one of the most unfunny people in the comedy industry. And yeah, he's made a whole career out of just not being funny. I don't know how he got to the place that he's been, but he's got a fan base, so more power to him, I suppose. And he is the voice here, and he's basically reading it. He's reading his lines like he just got the script. Like he's cold reading it for the first time, and they're recording him, is what it sounds like. And it's not the fact that he's supposed to be the, indifferent emoji. That's not the way it comes off. It's just very much like, and it's also, I don't think it helps either. like, not to say that, you know, he has much talent, but I mean, even with this dialogue, it's hard to tell who could have done anything with this, because it's kind of like, you know, when Jimmy Fallon does his segment on The Tonight Show where they read the scripts that were written by, like, first graders, and they read it like they're serious actors. It kind of feels like this script was written that way, when you listen to what the fuck is coming out of these characters' mouths. And, you know, this is it's one of those obvious things to where if they have one joke, there's gonna, and not like I talked about before, much worse. A case in point, one of the first jokes in the movie, one of the first of many wordplay jokes in the movie, because you know it's going to be one of those where 99% of the humor is the wordplay. So there's one that's, apparently there's a shrimp emoji. I don't know enough about this shit to know if all of this is actually, like, an option when you're doing that, but apparently there's a shrimp emoji, and he's standing here on the street corner, and Gene comes up and talks to him, and when the shrimp talks, he has an Australian accent. And as soon as you hear that, you think, oh, Jesus, okay, shrimp on the Barbie, we got it. And that's it, and you hope they're going to let it go. But then as the character leaves, no, he goes off with a bunch of other shrimp, and he says, we're on our way to the Barbie, because you didn't fucking get it when he started talking in an Australian accent. And it's like, okay, so this is an omen, right? This is going to be what the movie is. It's like, this isn't some one-off piece of shit joke. This is what we're doing. This is where we're headed. Okay, we got like an hour and a half to go, so let's just keep going. And you kind of think it's basically trying to do like the Lego Movie vibe, or another recent example would be Hotel Transylvania. Those animated movies where you can see that a whole lot of effort was put into them, and so much so that you're constantly busy when you watch them because you're afraid you're going to miss a joke. Because there's either something in the background, there's something in the foreground, or there's a little reference here, or a little line here. And so much is happening all at once to where the movies are like jokes through their entire runtime. And this is trying to do that same thing. Only trouble is that all the fucking jokes are lame. And there's, like, every single one of them. And, like, okay, like, I talked about, like, with the Lego Batman movie. It's like, the Lego Batman movie, I was just struggling to try to catch every single thing that they put in there. But the problem is that, in, like, Hotel Transylvania, even, you can see, you know, little jokes happening in the background, and you're always looking for something. This has jokes like, there's a moment where James Corden, who is the voice of a high five, he's a hand, and he is eating a whole bunch of candy, and he basically pukes up a candy corn, and then he's debating whether or not he's going to eat it again, while Gene tries to talk him out of it. This is like a whole scene. Like, this is a whole joke. It probably lasted for like 10 seconds, but it felt like 5 minutes of him just saying, don't do it, don't eat the candy corn, and Corden just like teasing, and then ultimately he just does. And it's like, okay, Lego Movie, you see all those jokes. Hotel Transylvania, see all those jokes. This is what the Emoji Movie has. James Corden deciding whether or not he's going to eat a candy corn he just puked up. Does that not speak volumes for the whole thing? just as a whole. So we go on. It's kind of like obviously his parents were Stephen Wright and Jennifer Coolidge, and obviously they're the indifferent emoji. They're just the whatever. Like obviously, if there's one thing you can give credit for this movie, it's the fact that Stephen Wright was perfectly cast. So at least there's that. And so he's doing so. You just kind of watch them and you're like, oh, so are they basically the stand-in for the audience? Like, this is what they... So that's basically their expression is how we are watching the movie, so there's that. Just completely and totally emotionless. And so, and it's not one of those things where you can tell where the movie's attention span is, because there are a lot of jokes about being hyper. Like, obviously I just talked about the fact that Corden's fucking hand eats a bunch of candy and gets a sugar rush, and then there's a joke later where it's like, one of the emojis is a cup of coffee, so what do you think his gimmick is? We only see him for like a second, but it's enough to say, Yeah, we fucking get it. We we know every single joke in this movie before you don't even need to say your jokes anymore, because we fucking get them before they even exist, before we even see the characters. We can just tell. So then it goes on, and this movie doesn't have anything to say, really. Like, usually even the worst animated movies try to throw in just a little blatantly obvious message we've heard a billion times in there, just to seem like they're making a point. But you just look at this, and you see, like, there's one moment when Anna Faris's character is, like, trying to come up with something, and Jean says it, and then they all congratulate Jean, and her response is, oh, well, that's just typical, a guy getting all the credit for a woman's ideas. And it's kind of like, I suppose they're trying to say something with that, only trouble is that's like a throwaway line that nobody pays attention to, so it's like, alright. And then maybe there's like, I mean, I suppose there's like a be yourself thing in here, I don't know, but it's really bogged down by where the rest of that goes. But in the meantime, it's like, honestly, okay, look at the words for starters. I was talking about how it's like kids wrote it or whatever, and it's kind of like, there's a moment when Jean says, I'm gonna be the meh that I was meant to be. Because that's what his emoji is, the meh emoji is apparently what it's called. And it's like, in another movie, he would have said that, and there would have been a character next to him to go, oh my god. And like acknowledge, like, wow, that is terrible. And even though, if in movies that do that, that's no excuse. A bad line is a bad line, whether you have a character there to say, oh my god, that was such a bad line. But it's another thing when you look at this movie, and this movie is so shameless about this, that's not there. That line, I guess, is supposed to be, hilarious wordplay, and, oh, this character has a turning point. This is a serious turning point for him. Shameless. No, they're not even gonna try to call out when they're being shitty. They're just gonna exist in their shittiness and try to pass it off as half funny and half, oh, we're actually trying to say something here. You're not. To the point that where I'm not even totally completely sure you are trying to say something. That could have just been, oh, look, another easy wordplay thing. Write that down. That's what the rest of the script is. You want to talk about another way the movie isn't even trying? There's, the whole thing about, a recent example is, was it Shakira? That was the one in Zootopia? It was one of them. And how, as soon as you realize that someone who sings is given a role in an animated movie, the only reason that is the case is because this fucking thing's gonna sing. And we know this from every instance, but, of course, we have to have the dance app thing. And there's a woman in there, and, shock surprise, Christina Aguilera. So, yes, this is one of those movies that has a dance scene in the middle of it. Multiple dance scenes right in the middle of it. And it's like, this is what those shitty spoof movies did when they had nothing else to offer. Just put this in to just drag out time to this very minuscule runtime as it is. Just to get it enough to where they could get it a theatrical release. Just absolute paper-thin bullshit. And that's the thing, is, like, all these movies end with fucking dancing anyway. Like, every animated movie ever ends with this idiocy of the characters just dancing around just before the credits roll or while the credits are rolling. It's like, it couldn't even wait for the movie to end to make the characters start dancing like fucking idiots. And it's like, because that's all this movie has to offer. But then we go on, and there's stuff like, okay, so I mentioned this earlier, and it's like, usually people who are, not even necessarily cynical people who are, like, trying really hard to come off as cynical, like to point at certain movies and say, like, oh, this movie's just an advertisement for this, and this movie's just, you know, corporate or whatever, and it's just all that bullshit. But here, you really do wonder. It really does actually look like when it very first starts, it looks like a commercial. And it's like it's just trying to appeal to this really young demographic, doing unfunny shit, trying to say, hey kids, we're hip to you, or some shit like that, the Steve Buscemi and 30 Rock joke. But the problem here is that, yeah, it really does come off like that. It really does come off like it's just supposed to be some advertisement. They're just trying to release it as some feel-good animated movie for children. And then you go on that, you look at other bad animated movies I've seen in the past, and usually my response is, well, I mean, it's not like it's harmful. You know, it's like, they'll watch it, and, you know, the colors will stand out to them, dancing, whatever bullshit, and then that'll be it. It'll be there to entertain them or whatever. Like, a movie that did that fairly well was, like, Trolls. Where, like, that's all it existed for, was just to entertain kids, and that's what it was. There was nothing harmful about it. There was no harmful message. It was nice, you know, they had a nice little thing going on there. But then you look at this, and it's like, harmful's a strong word, but it's one of those cases where it's like, not only does it not really have much of a message, if the one that it has, it really does not convey well, but then you get to the very end of the movie, and all those messages go by the wayside anyway, because what it all comes down to, what we learn when he asks the girl out, is emojis are in fact an effective way to communicate, is what this movie is saying by the end. I don't know if I would say, like I said, harmful is a strong word, but I don't want to say it's harmless either because of that. Because it does kind of like, it seems like they're going to try to, you know, take a jab at stuff like that towards the beginning when they say stuff like, oh, you know, kids, and how they're, like, so emotionally attached to their phones. And it's like, I think they're making fun of that concept about how they're so fucking dependent on this shit. Not to be the, you know, old man type. I know I'm still hurt that one guy called me an out-of-touch old man because I didn't like paper towels. I still feel that, dude. It's like, but, I mean, for real. It's like, the whole thing that we're losing communication because people just want to stare at their goddamn phones, and this movie is trying to plug the fact that, oh, if you really want to communicate with people, all you need to do is choose the right smiley face on your phone. Then happiness will find you. That's actually what it ends up coming down to. So, I don't know. And of course, they're trying to be pandering bullshit at the same time by casting Patrick Stewart as the shit emoji. And it's like, that only existed just to get people to say, hey, Patrick Stewart's the shit emoji. That's the extent of the joke. And it was, like I said, it's made before you even see the movie. Before the joke even comes, you know the joke. There's nothing, if you can even call it that. If you can even call it a damn joke. And so it's like, yeah, so I was wondering, you know, is the hate for the movie, you know, blown out of proportion or whatever? I'm sure people are gonna hype it up for their fucking, you know, views and shit, and they're gonna say it's the worst thing that ever happened to them. I'm sure there's other YouTube videos of people, like, practically screaming into their cameras and shit, and it's like, it's like, that feels like a put on, obviously, but I mean, it's a pretty fucking, it's a pretty fucking big disaster, this thing. So, yeah, that's pretty much what it is. So, so when I say, is the reaction blown out of proportion, when you see people screaming and raving about it, yeah, probably, but the, you know, initial sentiment that those people have, yeah, it's about right. So, there's that. And just, yep, just a whole movie of just putting words and sentences that don't make sense just to go with your product. Is it James Corden that's going to sing, nobody knows the trouble I've seen, but he says, nobody knows the touch screens I've seen. Okay. So, let's move on. We're getting into trilogy territory here for a couple of movies. Our next movie is going to be Despicable Me 3. A series I always was fine with. Even that Minions movie I didn't totally hate. Even though it was clearly, once again, more of the, let's just do this because we can make money. And this time, we introduce another villain, because Gru has pretty much become our hero now since the first movie, ever since Jason Segel and then Benjamin Bratt. And now we got Trey Parker, and the funny thing about that is I just said that Benjamin Bratt was the voice of the villain in the second movie. That happens to be very close to Trey Parker's character's name of Balthazar Bratt. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but, and he is a former child star that is now obsessed with the AIDS. It's like when David Spade played Dickie Roberts' former child star, if he became a supervillain, is what this movie is. And yeah, that's kind of a funny joke. Like, he's a one-joke character, but it's a funny enough joke. Like, once again, it's not particularly clever or anything, but the execution is well enough, and obviously, you know, Trey Parker's one of the best voice actors ever, and funniest, certainly, so, it's all going to come together nicely, and they even throw in those funny details, like, his grappling hook, when it goes up to the ceiling, has a disco ball attached to it. There's, like, when he talks in his sleep, he says, "Yes, Molly Ringwald, I'll take you to prom," and, his little minions are called his Brat Pack. There's a moment in the climax when he quotes the A-Team. It's all, like I said, it's all, the 80s joke is like the whole joke of the character, but they keep finding little references and ways to actually make it funny and not just feel like they're just kind of beating the dead horse. So, yeah, and obviously there's actually a lot of stories going on here, which may be the movie's main fault. But we do return to our characters. Obviously, what Steve Carell's been doing with Gru has always been really funny. I really love this character, and I love the way Carell plays him. And even though he's still, we were talking about with Loki just now, even though he's becoming a hero now, he still definitely has the villain inside of him, and it comes out in these kind of nice way. There, he kind of, a dark sense of humor still comes out of him occasionally. And it's really nice to see both versions of him, though, because the character works so well either way. And now Carell gets to do a couple of things here, because now he plays his own twin brother, Drew. Which is also kind of a funny concept. He was apparently they were separated at birth, and the mother took one and the dad took the other. And one became the supervillain, and the other a rich, blonde, hair-flowing type. His little intro when he comes down the stairs saying brother, and he stretches the word out till he gets all the way down the steps, and then his hair flows in slow motion. Once again, one joke idea, but the way they execute it is pretty funny, for the most part. And there's a whole bunch of plots going on here. Drew is basically trying to become a supervillain with him. Obviously, Balthazar Bratt has a lot of plans up his sleeve, but also just will disappear for long periods of time throughout the movie because there's so much other stuff going on. There's his whole relationship with Kristen Wiig's character, which is not very interesting. And then they do something here that's really throws the movie off, and it's just kind of, like, I guess I get it. Like, I guess for being a kid's movie like this, the attention span may not totally be there, but on this movie it does really show, like, the whole subplot devoted to the unicorn, where they take this one line from the first movie, when she wins the unicorn at the little fair, the theme park or whatever, and she said that one line, and then, like, everybody loved this character and it did the unicorn thing, and so now they've been milking this shit with this character. This is all this character is now. This little girl is just the unicorn girl, and that's all she fucking talks about, that's all she does. And they've decided to make, like, a whole subplot in this movie about it, where she actually goes looking for a real unicorn because she sells her stuffed one to help Gru, for $2, and, which is nice. And some shady dude convinces her that a real unicorn exists and where to find it. And this is like a whole subplot, but the trouble is that these subplots, where you have, like, there's the whole unicorn thing, and then the minions are in prison, and all this other stuff, like the Drew stuff, and the thing is that none of these plots really converge. Like, that's usually the kind of thing you're gonna do. Trey Parker is a master of this when you watch South Park, to where it's like you have different things branching off, but then eventually this is all gonna come together. But that's not really the way this movie works. It's like it just has these subplots just to fill in the time, when really this is kind of our story, and these things might possibly just come in at the last minute or whatever, or not at all, like the unicorn thing. They try to make the unicorn thing like some kind of message, like Guru saying like, oh well, we all are looking for our unicorn in life, and sometimes when we find it we're disappointed. I get it, but it feels very convoluted and very forced when you look at the fact that the unicorn thing was an entire subplot up to this point, just for Guru to say, well, you know, when you find something, maybe it's not what you expected. And it's like, okay, but you spent a lot of time on that shit. Like, a whole fraction of the movie. But, okay. So, and going on, the characters aren't always that particularly strong. I'm looking at Kristen Wiig's character, obviously. Because there is one scene in this movie that feels like there's a whole lot of deleted scenes that lead up to it. because he goes and he hangs out with Drew, and Kristen Wiig's excited because she gets to go hang out with the girls, and they just get to have girls' time or whatever. But then suddenly, when they all come back, Gru and Drew are having fun. They're like doing the, hey, let's try to be the other, but we're obviously blatantly who we are, and they can tell, but we think we're getting away with something. And they're just playing games with each other. And Kristen Wiig's character is supposed to come off like she's annoyed by this. Like, they're having too much fun to the point that it's, like, messing up their relationship or something. But the trouble is there's nothing that leads up to this. It comes from out of nowhere that she's, like, suddenly put off by how much they like spending time together. And then that never really is brought up again after this scene. It is like one scene where she thinks they're spending too much time together. Even though the whole day they spent together, she was off doing something else. So I don't really know what that was in there for. It was almost like that's the conflict they were going to go with, but then they decided to go with the other subplots, and they forgot and left that seed for that conflict in there when it doesn't go anywhere and has no bearing on anything else and is never mentioned again. So that felt a little sloppy. So another concern usually going into these movies is the distribution of the minions. Because obviously they got very popular after the first movie, and they were like the breakout toy. You see like the merchandise everywhere. And then when the second movie came out, it was like a lot of the plot was devoted to the minions, and a lot of people were like, that's, now you're just milking what you realize your cash cow is, and now it's starting to feel artificial. Then they got their own damn movie, which is kind of referenced in a joke with a billboard you see at the end of the movie. And so you go into this and you're like, well, how much are they it now? But yeah, they're evenly distributed throughout the movie. They still get their little spotlight, but that was the case from the get-go anyway. And like I said, the whole concept of them going to prison is pretty funny. And we only cut back to it occasionally. We don't dwell on it too much, or them too much. Certainly not as much as we have in the past. So I thought that was done fine. But for the most part, it does feel like... but yeah, as far as them going to prison, that's the thing too, is about the fact that the plots don't come together, is... what the minions are doing in their subplot really could be anything. Like, the fact that they're in prison pretty much has nothing to do with anything. They could have been preoccupied in any other way whatsoever, and the movie would be exactly the same. So that's where you can kind of tell this subplot might be a little pointless, because it could literally be anything, and it's not going to have an impact, and it's not going to change what happens in the movie. So as long as they flowed in at just the right time, they could have been fucking doing anything before this. So yeah, I feel like some more thought could have been put into, if you have to have this many subplots, make them all connect seamlessly. Don't just make them kind of go off in their own dead-end directions, and then that's it. They're just a part of the movie now that doesn't go anywhere. And yeah, it is one of those cases where pretty much as a scene starts, you know, like, every outcome. You know the whole layout of the movie from the word go, but that doesn't really matter, though, because it's not really that kind of movie. the life of the movie is going to be the jokes, and the animation is still great, just as it was in the first movie and forward. It's not as funny as the first, but it is still very funny for the most part. And obviously, in these movies, the voice work is always a huge high. Like, I was talking about when I reviewed the first movie, it was... These movies in particular really seem to go for actually using their voice actors. Because you have those movies where... take Minions out of this, because John Hamm was bored out of his mind when he was doing voice work for Minions, you can tell. But with the Despicable Me movies, it's like you can really tell that they actually used... the voice actors for their talent, and actually make them do different voices that aren't just their own. It's like I said, when I saw the first movie in theaters, I didn't know, what was his name, Vector? I did not know that he was Jason Segel until the end credits. Because they actually made him do, like, a voice, and not just talk like Jason Segel. And that continues here, where it feels like the actors are actually doing characters, and not just talking regularly as themselves just to get an easy paycheck. So that's always been something that's been appreciated from these movies that do it a little differently than you might see in a lot of other animated movies. Like, for instance, the next one I'm about to talk about. Our next movie is going to be Cars 3. We didn't need a Cars 2. This movie shows we don't need a Cars 3 either, but might as well talk about it a little bit. One of the things that was really, really built up about this movie, I remember, apparently the trailers for Cars 3, like each trailer for Cars 3 was, the structure of it and everything was lifted from Michael Bay trailers. Like, they would recreate Michael Bay trailers when they made the Cars 3 trailers. And they were really building up the whole idea that Lightning McQueen crashes badly. And that's kind of our starting point. And people were like, whoa. Is Cars finally going into some dark shit? Like, are we gonna actually get some really unexpected territory from this little franchise here? And that's the thing, too, is when you watch this, and you know it's coming, so you're like, all the friendships are gone, him and his Kyle Petty car friend, and everybody, and then you're just kind of waiting for the crash to happen. He's got a new rival with Armie Hammer. And they're doing the age-old, old versus new plot where everybody's retiring and Lightning McQueen's still gone, but he's getting to be almost like in has-been territory. And Armie Hammer's car is the new, like... He's really fast, he's always winning, he's got the attitude, he's younger, he's more suave, he's got, like, the black car. And he's just making Lightning McQueen look dated. And so he's got to deal with that, and then while he's trying to beat him, he ultimately crashes, and it's pretty brutal, and it's like, yeah, it's a car crashing, we see that in movies, but when you watch the Cars movies, you're obviously thinking, that's a character. Like, that's the character's body ripping itself apart and flipping around and crashing and, like, almost catching fire, and you're like, damn. And then you're like, man, what's this gonna do? Like, this is gonna really take him out. But then, yeah. The movie is about an hour 45. The Cars movies have always been too long. And basically, this whole thing, this big conflict they build up because of this, the conclusion, the solution is, we'll just buff him out. And in about 20 minutes, he'll be back to normal, and we'll get on with another plot. It's like, I mean, they do say, like, what, 4 months passes or something when he's, like, out of it. But yeah, if we just cut through that, buff him up a little bit, make him look better, bring him to Nathan Fillion to, you know, shine him up like in the place in The Wizard of Oz when they, like, restuffed the Scarecrow and they, like, shined up the Tin Man, they put the fucking bow on the Cowardly Lion. That's basically what they do to Lightning McQueen after his big-ass crash. And then the movie just goes on about its merry way, pretty much like that never happened. Except that they're trying to basically retrain him. So yeah, we basically get to do the mentor thing again that we did with Paul Newman in the first movie. Yep. Because that's the thing, too, is you look at these movies, and it's like, after the first movie happens, you can clearly tell where they were like, okay, this made a shitload of money, and we're obviously going to continue this. Like, Cars is going to get sequels for some reason, and so it's like, okay, so what can we do with this, though? This is a very limiting concept when it comes to it. Like, in the actual movie, it's like, it's limitless. We can do anything with cars. We can make cars everything. We can make cars that flies. Just tiny little cars with wings. But then once you're like, oh, we need to do another one of these, oh no, what do we do? And it was clear they did not have many good ideas, because the sequel ended up being Mater, the one voiced by Larry, the I want to fucking kill myself guy, is a spy. It's like, whoa, okay, that was off the fucking deep end. Okay, so we come back to the third movie, and it's like, and it's like, oh, we're just gonna basically do the mentor thing again. Only every character in this movie has a mentor, pretty much. It's like, the mentor becomes the mentor, and then the mentor also has a mentor, and so on. And that's all we can do. On padding it with all these ancient cliches. And there's some stuff where you kind of think maybe they're going to go into some territory, like when he's on the simulator and he's trying to figure this out, and you think, is he going to have like PTSD from his crash? And it's like, even Talladega Nights did this. And it's like, it's like even Talladega Nights did the whole he has PTSD when he crashes, and it like really messes him up and takes him out of the game, and he has to mentally get back into this game. But it's almost like it barely happens at all. He's doing the simulator thing, and the problem is that he just can't control the simulator, really. It's not that he's having like Vietnam flashbacks or anything. And so they, like I said, it's almost like that didn't even happen. Pretty much anything could have taken him out of racing, and you'd have the same movie, like Despicable Me's problem. And yeah, and there's even, and yeah, there are moments like that, like the opening, well, with the crash anyway, and it's kind of like, they continue on with that, with this movie having a demolition derby scene in it. And once again, you're saying, these are the characters' bodies smashing into each other. This is kind of dark if you explore that enough. But no, they want to make it all happy and shit, and go into this new character, this little plucky trainer that Lightning McQueen has. But then that's not enough for him to have a trainer. He's got to do the whole, eventually he becomes her mentor thing. It's kind of like Roy Munson and Ishmael in Kingpin, where it's like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm training for this, and then, oh, well, this is your shining moment, you do this. And it's supposed to kind of be like a handing off thing, but then lo and behold, there's another fucking mentor in this movie, Chris Cooper's vehicle, who worked with Paul Newman's character supposedly in the past. So he's also the mentor to Lightning McQueen and gets him back in the game, only for him to get his trainer back in the game. And it's, wow, what an absence of ideas. Just what an absence of creativity altogether. It's going to be one of those movies where the lead character is going to get mad, and he's going to yell at the plucky girl and get mad at her and break her shit. And it's like, wait a minute, is this fucking Wreck-It Ralph again? Just one problem, though. When Ralph destroys Vanellope's car, you want to fucking cry. In Cars 3, he accidentally knocks over a trophy she just won by accident. He didn't knock it over by accident. Well, he did, but she also won it by accident. It's like, oh, the emotion. I'm being bombarded with emotions right now. This is Pixar. Remember what they used to do? Yeah. I know all you fucks are still hung up on that bing bong bullshit, but no, they haven't been emotionally effective in a long time, and this is really, really beating that point in. So, yeah, so really it's just completely lazy, and just completely shows off that whole idea of, when Cars 2 happened, everybody screamed the same thing. Why does Cars have a sequel? And now that this exists, you look at it and all you can say to yourself is, why does Cars have 2 sequels now? Neither one accomplishes anything, or really provokes anything emotionally or otherwise out of it. So, yeah, I guess the animation's still really good, but I mean, on the story front here, just completely lazy. On the character front, lazy. Everything is just redone. And when it's not redoing old cliches, it's redoing itself. What's the point, really? So, yeah, but I mean, you know, whatever. Alright, let's get on to our last one. Our last one's going to be the Lego Ninjago movie. Okay, so, I have no idea what this property is. I still don't. I didn't know going in, I still don't now. Obviously, I do have a kind of a grasp on the characters a little bit here. But it is to my understanding that it is a, apparently there is, like, it's an actual set, but then there's also, like, some animated shorts out there or something, and there's what, like a TV show. There's something. Pretty much, it hasn't been a movie yet. So there it is, and I was, because I didn't even know if it was an existing property outside of Lego, like if this was another thing where they took something that wasn't Lego and made it Lego. But no, apparently this is like a Lego property from the beginning. Okay, so I just have to kind of work this out. But the thing is that wasn't really pulling me away from anything. It wasn't me saying, like, I don't know anything about this, so I'm probably not going to like it. It was kind of like, this is probably one of those things, especially with the whole Lego movie format, and their approach. It's kind of like, this, even if I don't know the property, this could probably be something worthwhile. If enough, I'm sure the creativity's in there, the jokes are in there, we'll see what happens. Because that approach has worked so much with the Lego movie and then the Lego Batman movie. So this begins, and we meet our main character, Lloyd, who is voiced by Dave Franco. And he is pretty much hated by everybody because it's a well-known fact that his dad is a supervillain. His dad is voiced by Justin Theroux. And Justin Theroux is basically this guy that's constantly trying to take over the world and constantly wreaking havoc, to the point that it's so commonplace, the townspeople basically just talk about him as if he's like a shitty neighbor. Just like, oh yeah, he did something again, what an asshole, and stuff like that. And they hate Lloyd so much that there's actually a hit song on the radio called Boo Lloyd, where they just shit talk him, and they bully him when he goes to school, and it is kind of a funny setup. And this character that Justin Theroux voices, it's like, Jackie Chan's character refers to him as the worst guy in the history of the world. Like I said, I like the fact that it's just common knowledge that he's like seen less as this huge villain and super villain, and more just like just an asshole. Just a guy that's always, messing up everybody's business and shit. And it's like, this could be a really fun character, but he ends up being in the movie too much and ends up being like the main focus, and that kind of brings it down. And the problem is, when you look at this movie, when you compare it to it basically being in that universe of the Lego movie and the Lego Batman movie, is there's a lot missing that was in those movies and made them so strong that's not in this one. The wit, certainly, to where, like I was talking about before, I was just mentioning this a lot in the Emoji Movie, where it's like, these Lego movies have like these constant jokes going on. But it's like, and there's usually like really hidden stuff, and there's stuff where like you can see the creativity coming out, not just in the way they've built the world, but the way they use the comedy as well, and how it kind of takes a meta approach, but not too much, like not almost excusing itself. But here, there's not really much of any of that. The jokes are very easy. And they're all within, this. There's no particular self-aware thing going on, at least not enough to do that. And it's not, it doesn't really have even though I said it wasn't deterring my expectations towards it, it really doesn't have that wide appeal that the other two do. This kind of feels like it was made for more of a specific audience. And so that kind of... And yeah, it doesn't really do enough to try to seem like it's expanding beyond much of anything. It feels very much confined in its own place. And the last thing the Lego movies have felt up to this point is confined. They just feel like their whole... The way they approach the comedy and the whole worlds and all that just feel like they're endless. And just the wit is constant. And this movie's missing all of that. And it gets to the point where, like, after, obviously with the way Lloyd is spelled with 2 L's, after about the 5th time his dad calls him Lloyd, you're like, yeah, we know, but they just kind of keep going with it. And that's basically how they treat the jokes. There is some stuff in there, like, the laser pointer with the cat is kind of a funny joke, and the way they build that up so much. But then there's also, and the voice work. The problem here is that it's a nice cast. You've got, like, Kumail Nanjiani and Fred Armisen, and, like I said, Jackie Chan. A whole bunch, Randall Park was in there somewhere. I know I heard his voice. I can't remember who the other... I know it's a whole bunch of familiar faces and voices. But the thing here is that there's just so many together. It's kind of like... It feels less like... how we had all the different characters in the foreground and in the background. Like, you know how you have, like, in the background of the Lego Batman movie, you had like Billy D. Williams as Two-Face and Conan as the Riddler and stuff like that, and all the different characters, Seth Green and all that. But it's like there are these big names that just showed up for like 2 or 3 lines, but it doesn't matter because they're just background characters, so it just kind of adds to it. But that's actually what it feels like for the main characters in this. That it's like a whole bunch of people recognize, but there's just so much going on and so many people talking. None of the characters are distinguished, and the talented actors don't really get to do anything with their characters apart from, say, a few lines here and there, when it's time for all the other people to do their same thing, and there's no real nice balance. It's just all everybody trying to get their lines in, and the characters just ends up not being interesting because of that. And once again, obviously with our lead voice being Dave Franco, I'm just really... I just find Dave Franco kind of dull. I've never really been drawn to him in pretty much any role he's done yet. Maybe the Disaster Artist will change that, but yeah. So that just kind of added to the whole. If our main character feels kind of dull from the get-go, that's not going to help at all either. And his deliveries aren't helping this either. The jokes just feel very like they're there with really no passion in them and no real like strive to be particularly clever. It's just they just are. And then it gets to the point where it tries to be heartwarming and it ends up getting in that really forced territory where the character, you don't care enough about the characters when they start doing the father-son thing, and it's like, this is such a cliche up to this point, and they do nothing else with it. They don't even add a whole lot of humor to it. It's just like, it just all feels played out, and it makes the Lego approach feel kind of played out too. But I feel like there's still gold to be had in there because the Lego Batman movie was so successful after it seemed like the Lego movie pretty much did everything it needed to do. I think this is probably just a dry spot. I'm sure there's still plenty of creativity here, but like I said, this movie makes it look like we've hit a dead end already. But I feel like it's still out there, but yeah, in the meantime, we've just got this, which is just... it just is. Alright, so I think that's going to be the end of this. We should be going back to me doing only 2 videos a week now, and back to a normal stride. With Murder on the Orient Express, we're going to do some action movies like I Saw American Assassin and Kidnap, and we got another couple of Antonio Banderas movies. He's really been pumping out the straight-to-video stuff this year, but because it's Antonio Banderas, I will keep watching, so... we'll have all that stuff to look forward to. Like I said, it doesn't really tie in with Murder on the Orient Express, but I didn't know what other video to put them on, so that's how we're going to do it. So, yes, and there's a Versus tomorrow, so that should be fun. So, until all of that, we're done.